Hello and welcome to this demonstration of painting a landscape with just two colours. The two colours I'm using is indigo. This is a Winsor and Newton colour from Cotman's range. It doesn't need to be this particular brand, it can be any indigo you have. And this is again Winsor and Newton transparent gold deep. It doesn't have to be these exact colours. If you haven't got them, if you've got a dark blue and if you've got a good strong dark yellow, you could use those, but these two do seem to go very well together. Paper I'm using is 300 GSM and it's cold press. Again, you can use any paper you want. I would say experiment and see what happens. In my palette, I have got just the two colours here that we're going to be using, the gold and the indigo, and I'm using flat brushes today. You can use rounds, it's not crucial. If you're interested, the sizes are an 8, a 10 and a 12. These are just some cheap brushes. There's nothing particularly fancy about these. They are just synthetics. Again, whatever brushes you've got, give it a go. This is just a sketch style painting. It can be a study, it can be a finished piece in its own right. Now I've actually put some colours out already, as you can see, and just off camera here, I have got some water. So to begin with, because I'm only using two colours, I'm going to just use one brush for each colour. Saves me having to keep cleaning them out. And I'm just going to wet the brush a little bit, and I'm going to pick up some very strong pigment, almost like it's come straight out the tube. There's a little bit of water in here, but very little. Now, where do we want to place our horizon line? Well, I'm going to go just below centre, because the hills I'm hoping to paint in will come above that line. Again, experiment. Going for a high or a low, but that's totally up to you. It's your painting. So just dab across. I'm leaving some little gaps. I'm not going to go all the way across. The reason being is this is showing hillside where the actual sea and the river meets, and I want to actually show a little bit of the headland. If we go all the way across, there's a good chance that our viewer's eye will also go straight across and straight out the picture. So that's why I'm working on that. And then I'm going to drop the landscape in on a diagonal. Diagonals are more interesting than just straight lines. So we've got indigo down. I'm just going to add a little bit of the gold. Now I'm not going to put the gold all the way across. I just want to dab it in a few places. And you'll see how this will affect where we get our paints mixing. I'm putting a little bit just below the actual indigo as well. So then I find it's often easier to turn for when I come to painting what is just water. So this will be the top edge of the actual hills. So I'm going to start slightly low, work a little bit higher and then work back down. But I'm going to paint the water in first. I might come a little bit higher. You don't want too much water. We can always add. And I'm just going to start filling in. You might be able to see there are a few little gaps, but I'm happy with that at the moment. I'm not necessarily wanting to fill the whole thing with water. And then as I come down, hopefully as I touch, we'll start to see the pigment will start to actually move up. And as you can see, we're now getting the combination of the indigo and the gold, and we're starting to get some greens coming into it. Now, if the paint's not moving particularly fast, we can pick up a little bit more water and come back in and just tap to encourage it to move. Now I'm going to turn the paper back around so it's easy for me to see what I'm doing. Now, if we want to encourage the paint to move up, we can just tap. Oh, let me just straighten that up. That's better. Tap in like so. And then we can also tilt our paper just to start to encourage the paint to flow. Now, what you will find is obviously the colour will be limited only to go into the area where we've actually gone in with paint. Sorry, with the water. The paint will stay within that. Unless you tilt and got a lot of water, in which case it can just break away. So you just need to be aware of that. Okay. These colours aren't quite as strong as I would like. So in that case, let's pick up a little bit more pigment and let's drop some more in. And we're just going to let these colours work together. Now we have got a band or an area, I don't know if you can see there, where the paper is fairly dry. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of water on the brush I've been using, and just fill in some of those gaps just to encourage. I'm not going to take them all out. Again, it's a personal choice, but with these little paintings, you can afford just to experiment. And I'm just going to just tilt that down. And again, you can see it moving about. One of the main things often is just to have patience. It's just sometimes to let the paint do its own thing. As I say, if we start mixing it too much, we'll just end up with a solid green. Okay, so let me wash off my water brush because we did put that into some of the pigment. I'm just going to make sure it's clean. So back to my indigo brush, and I'm just going to drop in a second line, but I want to leave a gap. It can meet in places, it can sort of come up and just kiss that top edge, but I want a gap to create some sort of horizon line, and that this can be whatever we imagine. I'm going to just tap in a few places just there. Okay, so as we could see on the reference, we actually have an area of sand. A little drop of water there. Let me just take that off. There we go. We've got an area of sand that runs across. It comes in on a diagonal line like so, and that way it gives some movement to the picture as well because we're using a diagonal. So I'm going to pick up some pigment and I'm just going to drop it in, and again I'm just doing a bit of a broken line. I can, because this at the moment is obviously dry wet paint on dry paper, and then I'm just going to pick up again some clean water and I'm just going to sweep that in just to give us that foreground. Now I'm going to sweep down a little bit more to bring some of this in, because what I'm going to do is, again, we're only using two colours, don't forget. I want to bring in those grasses, reeds, whatever they were in the foreground. So I'm going to pick up some indigo and just drop that in. And again, I'm not going to come all the way across. I'm only going to come in part way. On the reference, it runs all the way across, but again, we're ending up with just bands of colour. I'd rather put some shape into those areas, and I'm just dropping those in. And again, if we feel we need to strengthen the pigment, the amount of indigo against the gold will vary the colours we get. Now I want to put some detail into the distant background and also into these foreground colours. Now you could use a craft knife, you could use, let me just find one here, maybe a tip of a brush if you've got one of these with a cut edge. What I find works really well and comes free with every paint tube is a corner, and it's pretty safe. You can't really hurt yourself with that. But what we can do is we can draw in and draw maybe some just general detail. And I'm just making this up. Don't go too crazy, but if you feel you want to put another one in, put another one in. As you can see, in places it draws the pigment in other places it removes it. And you'll find as the paint dries, it will start to settle. Now in this foreground where we had the grasses, I actually just want to flick in some details. But think about the general direction the grasses are travelling in. They're not all going to be exactly the same position, but they're going to move across. And we can just flick those in like so. Not going to go too crazy. And as we can see, we're drawing some of the pigment up and giving us some of those grasses. Now you could leave it at that and go for like a semi-abstract type landscape. We could add in some details, some birds. But if we want to add a sky in, then I'm just going to add a very simple sky. Don't want anything too complicated. Again, I want to make sure my brush is clean. And this is the brush that I've been using for water. So that's all I'm doing off camera. So I'm just going to lay in some water, and I want the sky probably to move in a diagonal movement again. You can see my keenness for diagonals. And we're just painting up into there. And again, you're probably saying, can't really see what you've done. Got a little bit of paint there, doesn't matter. And as you can see, it's fairly damp. Again, I'm going to pick up not too much pigment. And again, I'm just going to very lightly just touch across the sky like so. And then I am going to use the brush that just had the water in, just to move across, just to give us wispy type sky into the background. And I'm just going to run this back over into the corner. And again, we can always tilt the paper to encourage the movement, and it doesn't have to just be that movement. We can actually tilt on a diagonal, because that's the way we've painted the paper in. Make sure I keep that in camera, so it comes down like so. Now obviously, as we've dropped this into the sky, it would be reflected so much into in the water underneath. But again, I don't want to fill that all in with colour. So let's see what colour we've actually got on the brush still, and just bring some of that across. There you go. I didn't need to actually pick up any more. And again, I'm only coming across, I'm leaving some gaps because that's how I want that to come across. I'm just going to try and straighten that edge up. If you feel it's not strong enough, again, just a tiny bit of pigment just to add in just a little bit of detail. And again, we're kind of mirroring the colours that we have there in the sky. And for that, for now, I would probably leave that to dry. As I say, this is a sketch style. It's something that can be used either as a finished painting, or you could work and experiment with the colours and the actual composition and use this as a reference for painting a larger picture. I'm going to let this dry, then we'll just drop a few little bits of detail in, and I think that will be it. So our watercolour painting's now dry. I'm just touching with the back of my hand. One way of checking if it's dry is if it feels at all cool, it means it's still damp, but this is nice and dry now. We could just leave it at that. I quite like how clouds have settled. We've got some detail here, and as you can see, the lines we drew in using the corner of the paint tube, this gave us some of this detail and these grasses. And that could be it, if that's all you want. We could take it a little bit further. We could add a little bit more detail. I've got a very tiny brush here because I think I might add some birds. So where should we add our birds? Well, we're going to use our friend, the rule of thirds, which is basically if we divide painting into three, one there, so we've got left, centre and right, and the same across the top, across there. So top, middle, bottom. And the interesting places is normally, let me just grab another brush, is normally where those lines intersect. It would be there. Talking somewhere here, somewhere here, somewhere here, or somewhere here. I wouldn't necessarily put things in all four corners, but if I was going to put something into interest, I think probably here. I'm always quite keen to add a bird now and again. Now, with birds, if it's something you haven't done many before, rather than doing it straight onto your finished painting and then thinking, I wish I hadn't done that, you can always just take another piece of paper and have a little practice. The technique I've found it's very good for birds is rather than doing a bird which is like that, although to be honest, that was pretty rubbish anyway, but rather than doing a bird like that or like that, okay, I'll bring this a bit closer, okay, that type of bird. What works quite well is to put a little dab of paint down and flick away, then leave a little gap, a little breathing space, and add in out of the line. Okay. And this is why it's really useful to practice on another piece of paper. So a little dab and a flick, and again, if it's easier, move the paper, a little space, and paint again. And it's really the little space between the two lines that add to the detail. Now, if you're thinking, oh dear, I really don't want to do this with a paintbrush, on this sort of picture, you could always use, this is just a gel pen, zebra, whatever it is, 0.7. And again, we're still going to use the same technique in that I'm going to put a little dot and flick, a little space, and in again. But again, if we're going to do some birds, we would vary the angles of the wings. And again, some can be tiny, some could be bigger. And that's how I would have a go at that. So let me show you what it looks like with a pen. That's probably going to be the easiest. So again, I'm going to put them in this sort of area. So little dot, little flick, and then a little space. Again, if it's easier, turn the paper, and we do that. We have our little bird. You could leave it one bird. If you add more birds, normally it seems to work better if you put in odd numbers. I'm not going to do an identical bird again because they might fly in formation, but it just looks a bit too obvious. So I'm going to put one down here, maybe a little bit bigger, and I'm just turning the wings. And then right in the distance, a little tiny bird, like so. Those are little birds there. Now, the other things we could also do, again, using the gel pen, you could use something else, a fine liner, that type of thing, but something fairly small, pointed. If we felt we wanted to add in some more detail into the hillside, we could always just put in a little bit of pen work. And again, this kind of, how would one describe it? It's sort of a wiggly line, but in a straight line, and then change direction again. So it's like down and off, something like that. Again, I wouldn't go too crazy, but again, it's your painting. Try it. What's the worst? You just have to paint another one. So again, on this foreground where the grasses are, we could actually flick in a few additional ones if we felt that's what we wanted to do. Again, I wouldn't go crazy. And again, try and vary the angle. And again, oh, this is a Posca pen, which again, this is acrylic, white, and this is a 0.7, same as the gel pen. Give it a little shake, because again, they sometimes settle. And again, maybe on a scrap piece of paper, just check it's working. And again, if you wanted to put a little bit of variation in, we could always put a few little flicks into our grasses. If you think they look a little bit bright, you could just touch them, because it is a little bit wet for a little bit of time. And again, if you wanted, where you've got some of these darker edges, you could always add in a little bit of that. And maybe here, if you wanted to put a little bit of a line into the water. And again, I wouldn't go too crazy with the actual colour. And then the final thing to do is you can always sign it. I'm just going to initial mine and pop the date on. And that's all done. Hope you enjoyed that.